90 to 92. The Gerry Ryan Show, Monday to Friday, 9 till 12 on 2FM.
Michael, good morning to you.
How you doing, Gerry? How you doing?
Very good. You have a question?
I do indeed. Gerry, we have a security camera on the front of our house.
Yeah.
And recently we've had an auctioneer take over for the selling of our house.
Okay, so you own this house?
Yes, we do, yeah. And we're selling our house. And we weren't too sure how he was doing, so we decided to put the camera that we had on the outside of the house into the sitting room of the house, which records voice and everything.
Very good.
And to be honest, I don't know whether it's legal or not, but we've done it, and we weren't quite happy with the way he had gone about trying to sell our house.
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely certain it is legal.
Okay, good.
It's not a tenant. He's not technically an employee. He's an agent of yours, and it's your home, so you're entitled to view it on CCTV if you wish. So I don't think you've broken any law there whatsoever. Also, we don't really have much by the way of laws of privacy in this country in the first place.
Right, well, that's good to know. Well, while he was in the house, he never mentioned anything about the house. He just let people in to view the house. He let people go upstairs, downstairs. He stayed in the sitting room himself. Never mentioned any of the features of the house.
Oh, no. So he's been completely rumbled.
Well, yes, exactly. So he done nothing. Like, there was people upstairs.
What's he saying about your house when people are being shown around it?
He just let them into the house, Gerry, and let them walk around. Actually, while there were people in the house, he was making a phone call. Yeah. Sorry, receiving a phone call. And when the people from upstairs came down, there was a guy still sitting on the couch downstairs, and he just said, right, let's go. And the other guy just sort of looked at him going, can you talk to me about the house? But he didn't, he just left.
And has he said anything negative about the house to anybody?
Well, while he was in the house, he said that, yes, well, I have another house around the corner. It's fully furnished, ready to move into, and it's cheaper than this house.
Yeah, it wouldn't be bothered with this one, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that's not a good way to sell my house, is it? So, no, it wasn't on. So I just said I'd ring and... No,
well, first of all, I think that, it's somewhat extreme what you've done, but nonetheless, I appreciate that... these are difficult times when it comes to selling homes. It's not that easy. So you want all guns blazing. You want everybody on deck, don't you?
That's it.
When you're going to this particular party. Have you? You should really sit this fella down and play him the tape.
Oh, what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the next viewing, and if it's the same, we're going to sit him down in front of the TV and show him.
We want to show you something. How are you? Do you take a beer? Sit down. We've got some popcorn. Let's have a look. Do you know what's on this tape here? You tosser. You couldn't sell bananas to monkeys.
I'm sure his boss would be interested in the tape too.
Well, exactly. I mean, it'll be a big wake-up call for him, and I'd really love to be there when you do it.
Yeah, but it just seems to like the job he done the other night when he was in viewing the house. Like, the guy across the road could have done the same thing.
Yeah, he's doing nothing.
Open the door and let people in.
So in other words, he's not bringing them in. He's not appraising them of the excellent furnishings and the lovely aspect in terms of the view out to the west, and think of what you could do with this space here. You could turn this into a utility room, and don't forget also we've got the broadband here, and we've got all the pipes they've been relit.
It's a beautiful corner house, Gerry. Like, it's a beautiful corner house.
Has he even ever used those words? Has he even ever used those words? It's a beautiful corner house.
No. We didn't hear him on the tape last night, so presume he hasn't used it before, but we'll keep an eye on him again and see how we go. If he doesn't speak up the house, we'll just go somewhere else. Oh, well,
I think what you need to do though is sit him down and show him, because somebody like that should be appraised of the fact that they've been rumbled, and that he's no more serving your interests than a zookeeper in Dublin.
And I wouldn't mind he's charging a nice price too. So.
No, you can bet your bottom dollar if he does by some fluke. If he by fluke manages to move on your home, he'll be looking with the law out for his percentage.
That's it, exactly.
No, sit him down if he whether he does succeed or not. I think you should sit him down, and in all likelihood, the chances of him actually mending his ways are pretty slim, aren't they?
Yeah, true.
Will you come back to us and tell us how you get on?
I will indeed. indeed, yeah. Would you just throw the question out there and see if anybody else has gone through this experience?
Okay.
Yeah?
Anybody else gone through this experience where they have suspected and then subsequently found out that the person to whom they had entrusted their property was in fact not only not talking it up, but possibly even talking it down when they were showing it? All right, Michael, best of luck, by the way. Tig, good morning to you.
Good morning, Gerry. How are you?
Very good. Another hidden camera, eh?
Oh, for sure.
Go on.
Yesterday at lunchtime in Harcourt Street, I won't mention the hotel in Dublin.
Harcourt Street, yeah.
Yeah, going to meet my darling beloved wife.
Yeah.
And I arrived early. And I said, felt the call of nature. Went downstairs to the loo, gently easing the pain and the pressure.
Oh,
and,
that's always a lovely feeling,
You know that
isn't
lovely
it?
feeling? Yeah, it's the best thing of all, at this stage of my life anyway. And I looked up to my right, and in the corner of the ceiling and the walls, right there, looking down at the urinals, a transparent bowl. I looked inside, and I see a camera peeping down at me. In the jacks.
In the jacks.
In the jacks, man.
Well, I know that there are some companies who put cameras into the washing area in toilets.
That's okay.
I know a burger chain did that, and they were quite right to do it because they'd been the subject of a whole series of bogus insurance claims against them.
Yeah.
Now, but what they didn't do was they didn't put a camera anywhere where you would be exposing your genitalia.
Well, there you go, Gerry.
Or wiping your bottom on screen or anything like that.
Yeah, like it was lunchtime yesterday. I was.
This is an issue. This is an issue that's I know that's become kind of live over the last few years in relation to drug taking in toilets.
Of course, yeah.
And I still think it's kind of unclear as to whether you would technically be allowed to have a camera in, for instance, a loo to observe whether or not somebody was actually breaking the law, taking drugs.
Yeah. I can see the logic behind it, but I mean, I was there.
Well, this is the urinal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you weren't doing a number two.
No, and it wasn't one of those sort of hidden bowls. It was a wall urinal, so everything was well exposed.
Well exposed.
And I was there, of course.
And did you wave at it? Did you?
I was there snorting half a ton of cocaine. The usual
you
thing you
yourself.
do at lunchtime.
That's quite difficult to do on the urinals, though, because it gets wet.
I waved at it, Gerry, but it wasn't by hands I waved at it.
So they got an eyeful, did they?
Well, I couldn't do it that high.
I'll tell you what we'll do for you. We'll make it's a simple legal inquiry. We'll make I can't answer that one. I can't answer whether. Yeah. I know that we have very little by way of privacy laws in this country.
Yes.
And in terms of personal integrity, I don't think we'd probably even less.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure whether you're protected, whether your todger is protected from view.
I don't know.
By law.
I wouldn't like to inflict that on anyone,
No,
but,
your wife should be the only person who has to suffer that.
But genuinely, Gerry, seriously.
But we will find out for you, though.
I'm shocked by it now.
And I don't blame you being shocked because I have complete sympathy for the companies who found it necessary to install CCTV into the washroom areas, because some of the stuff that we saw over the last few years, I think it might have been Supermax, was it? I think they ended up having a whole series of absolute, completely malicious and bogus claims brought against them. And the only way that they were able to put a stop to this was putting in the cameras. And of course, what they discovered on the cameras, I'm almost certain it was Supermax. What they discovered on the cameras was fellas actually setting up, scenarios where they had slipped and fallen and everything, and actually positioning guys on the tiles to make it look like they'd injured themselves. So I think in a situation like that, it's absolutely understandable and correct and appropriate. However, you having a piss. No, I don't think that's right. Okay, leave it with us and we'll see whether that's legal or not, okay?
Just keep your eyes on YouTube anyway, Gerry,
Oh, really? Yeah. Do you suspect you might be there?
Oh, yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Right. Good morning. Okay, that's the question, if you can answer it. We know that it's not illegal. It would not be illegal to have a camera placed where you have, say, washing facilities. I think that's probably perfect. But where, for instance, you're exposed while going to the toilet or wiping your bottom or something like that, is that legal? Fiona, good morning to you.
Morning, Gerry.
How are you?
Not too bad.
Now, you were listening to Michael and his problems regarding selling his home. He's very disappointed with the estate agent. In fact, he's so freaked out about this that he's in fact put in his CCTV camera, which he had on the outside of the house, into the inside of the house, where he consistently watches the guy not only not talking up his property as storm to potential buyers, but actually scratching his arse and basically doing nothing, making phone calls and walking around, standing out in the cold. He's a bit upset.
And I don't blame him, and I actually applaud him about actually taking control of the process.
I agree with you.
And finding out, a lot of people have suspicions, about what's happening, but to actually have proof is unusual, like we have, on our website, we have people that are selling their properties privately. And what's interesting about it is that 65% of those have been with an auctioneer already who failed to sell their property for one reason or another. And this absolutely ties in with the sort of feedback that we're getting of pretend viewings being set up. So we had a client who sat around the corner and watched the auctioneer go in on a number of occasions when he said he was meeting a potential buyer. No potential buyers were turning up. There's a whole range of issues that the agent may actually end up buying the property himself. There's a clear conflict of interest there. He may do the same for friends or acquaintances. They're not always acting in the seller's interest. And this has been the whole sort of myth over the last number of years where people have said, okay, an estate agent is sort of, he might be the devil, but he's the devil, And, I'd rather him be acting on my behalf than on somebody else's. But he's not necessarily acting on the seller's or in the seller's interest all the time, particularly where there's a self-interest there. So, for example, if a developer comes along, and we know that, we've had feedback about this, and two developers are bidding for a piece of land, and there may be millions in the difference between the prices of the two.
Yeah.
If the developer is offering the auctioneer if one developer is offering the subsequent sale of units on that land to the auctioneer, which bid do you think is going to go through, irrespective of whether it's the higher or the lower bid?
The one that has the knock-on effect.
So the one that has the knock-on effect for the auctioneer. Yeah. And exactly the same thing happens on a smaller scale with people, that are looking for, you might get a buyer coming to an auctioneer saying, right, okay, I have 2 properties to sell this year, or I have 1 property to sell. If you can get me this house at a knockdown price, you can have that. So again, the auctioneer gets 2 hits for the price of 1. So it's not in his interest to get the most money for the seller in that instance. And that's the problem. And that's the problem with the lack of regulation. And
Is part of the problem also, because this Deirdre McGee was who's producing the programme today, so you can blame her for everything. She made a very good point. She was saying, look, part of the problem is that there's a lot of kids who went into the business of real estate agency over the last couple of years. And it was basically like, selling oxygen to a dying man. It was a cinch. There was no effort involved whatsoever in it. Sure. All you had to do was put on a suit and turn up. Now, of course, we know there's a complete reversal of fortunes there. And suddenly you've got a whole generation of people who are going, what?
Absolutely.
What? Now, the old diehards will always be there, the guys, the men and the women, who knew how to sell and who could sell in a blizzard. Right, sure. They're there and they're still there, and they are solid gold, and they are always the ones who will be left when everybody else has fallen. But I think Deirdre might have a point.
Absolutely. But I think even kids can be trained up properly to sell property, and I think.
But if they've grown up though, if they've grown up over the last couple of years, not having to do anything except just turn up,
not having to do anything and not being regulated, there's 2 dimensions to this, Gerry. It's the supply and demand issue definitely made it easy. Anybody could have sold a property over the last number of years, absolutely anybody. But the lack of regulation is definitely an issue as well. If the system was right, it would make it difficult or practically impossible for the untrained person and for the rogue auctioneer or whatever to get through and to do this type of stuff. But unfortunately, when the system, self-regulation just doesn't work in any environment. We know that.
And are we talking about self-regulation still here?
Absolutely. There's been promises of this new regulatory authority, and it's just there's no signs of it yet. I was asked for my predictions at the end of last year, 2006, and I was saying, the regulatory authority wouldn't be in place by the end of 2007. There's still no sign of it. Now, I know the IAVI are calling for it as well.
But there is a voluntary regulation, isn't there?
Well, it says self-regulation, Gerry, which is no regulation at all.
Is there not an association or some sort of...
There are a couple of associations, but again, it boils down to...
So are you saying that I could set up a real estate agency if I wanted to?
It would cost you very little. All you would have to do is set up a bond. I think it's roughly about 12,000. Now, that wouldn't cover the deposit on most houses at the moment.
Wouldn't cover the deposit on a pair of underpants. That's
exactly.
ridiculous.
You know, so that's no protection at all. So, I mean, anybody can very easily, yet and still, set up an auctioneer's agency. And I mean, what we say anyhow is that it's absolutely, you know, it's not necessary in an awful lot of cases. Like, we have clients who have been, and they've been on television and stuff, Gerry. You know, they've actually been with auctioneers for over a year.
But I've been on the internet recently, just checking out exactly how people rent and sell.
Yeah.
Not only houses but apartments and bed sits and things like that. And I've been looking at quite a bit of it recently. And one thing I notice is that there are one or two very obvious organisations with gigantic databases, huge functionality when it comes to their website. We know the names, you know, they're the big names. And then there's a couple of new internet ones as well. Apart from the kind of Lisneys, you know, there's a couple of new internet accessibility ones who seem to trawl the databases of other organisations. Right. Now, that seems to be very useful and seems to work quite well. Then I noticed there's also a whole host of other, what look like, are transparently, obviously, you know, very small, minor operators. And I'm going, I wonder, like, all websites look pretty much the same once you have a good guy painting it for you.
Sure.
And it really does beg the question at the end of the day, if you don't know the names of the major operators, you really can't tell the difference between somebody who's going to be able to give you the kind of backup, who has the sort of track record that would indicate that they'll get a positive result for you, and the person who doesn't.
I mean, absolutely, and that's key, and that's why selling privately has grown 1,000%.
And that's where it's privateseller.ie, which is you. Absolutely. You know, I mean, Gerry, and what is privateseller.ie?
Increase in people selling privately. Basically, people listed on our site, they want to deal directly with the buyer, and the people coming to our site in droves are people that want to deal directly with the sellers. So we help people, and it's not just throw up the property listing on the website and that's it. It's a new area for Irish people. So we're there to support and advise them through the process. Now, to date, Gerry, and we've been up and running 3 years, we actually, even though we're there for people at any stage during the process, it actually works out very, very simply for both the seller and the buyer. It's not an onerous task for us at all to be there in a supportive capacity, because more often than not, the whole process goes through very, very smoothly.
So how does it work? How do you differ from the conventional way of doing business?
Okay, well, we'll say for our standard option, for €199, you get a website listing with your photographs. You put up your own details up on the website. So that's one aspect of advertising your property. You also get a fully branded privateseller.ie for sale board in the post. And we always advise you to take the for sale board, because we know, and auctioneers will tell you, that between 40 to 60% of sales leads generated are through the for sale board.
You're joking.
Yes, absolutely.
Through the board in the front garden.
Absolutely.
By a fella driving by going, look, Mary.
It's so important.
It's up for sale.
Typically what happens is that somebody will see, 80% of properties or thereabouts are bought locally, not by somebody, hundreds of miles away or somebody outside the country or whatever. Typically it's somebody from within the locale that will buy the property. So the board outside is incredibly important, and the feedback we get is that somebody sees the board, goes back and has a look at the detail on the website and obviously the guiding price, and if they're interested then they go ahead, they deal directly with the seller. This is the key issue, Gerry. You take out the middleman. So the seller is now in control of the entire process. So apart from saving €6,000 on an average house price on commission fees, so apart from the savings that you can make, you're in control. You can decide, I'm going to show the property at the weekend, or I'm going to show it this evening, or
But you have to show it yourself then?
Absolutely. But there's not a problem with showing the property. It cuts out the whole issue of mistrust. through a third person. So instead of being at the mercy of a third person, an agent, to come back to you and tell you what's happening and giving you feedback, you're in control, and the sellers are loving it. They're there. If the buyer asks them a question about the heating system, if the buyer asks them a question about the local school, they're the expert in their own property and in their own area.
That presupposes, though, that you have the time to do that, though, doesn't it?
But it's just as easy to show your property as it is to have to get into a car and park around the corner. The feedback we're getting, nobody has complained about time being an issue. In actual fact, they're so delighted when they get a viewing that they're delighted to be there and to be showing their property and to show it in the way that they want to show it and to know what's been told to the person. And in most cases, there's a trust relationship between the buyer
but Fiona,
and seller.
One area that I would think that private individuals probably would find themselves compromised in is when they look around and, the couple go, well, we do like it,
Yeah.
And you go, great, well, that's good. It's just a bit slightly outside our budget.
Yeah.
And you go, all right, yeah. And then at that point, what do you do? Do you start haggling?
You do exactly as you would through your own auctioneer. I mean, it really boils down to what price you want for the property, what prices. I mean, we always tell people to be aware of what prices properties are getting in their area.
And will you be able to tell them that kind of thing?
Well, it's very easily done, Gerry. Like 80% of buyers turn to the internet, researching properties before they actually go out there. So that same information that they have about properties in your area is available to you. I mean, that's all that a lot of agents can do, is be aware of what properties are going for in their area.
Now, I can imagine how this does work in terms of a private one-on-one sale. When it comes to a development, and I know that developments have slowed down a bit, but they're still out there, that would hardly be appropriate to use it there.
Well, Gerry, we've had a 400% increase already this year on developers coming to our site.
Really?
Such that we actually had to change the site to reflect that there is now a new development section on it. So the developers, I mean, I have. And
who have you got in the developers world?
Well, they wouldn't be big developers now. They would be the small to medium developers.
But would you expect developers to increasingly make the middleman redundant and come directly to you? Would you expect that to happen?
Well, it's happening. It's happening. And I mean, it's not an area that we thought we would be getting into, to be honest with you. But the market, the way it has turned, developers really know themselves as well how easy or how difficult it is to sell a property. And in many cases, they're taking us out as insurance. Great if we sell it privately. If we don't, it might still be left with an auctioneer. And that's absolutely fine.
And do you take any money? Do you take anything, or is this complete St. Vincent de Paul?
We take an upfront fee, Gerry. What we think is fair to put up your property listing and to put a board outside your door, which is all that is done in most cases. We also do a reduction in advertising. If you're going to do any advertising in the newspapers, we'll offer at times up to 40% off.
Is the newspaper worth advertising in, is it?
It certainly is. It very much depends on your property, and this is where we give advice on an individual basis. Like if you're in an estate in a town or an urban area, the benefit of the paper isn't necessarily as valuable to you as a property that's out in the country that won't be bypassed by as much traffic and mightn't get the same exposure, from the type of person that would want to live, or for the type of person that would want to live in the country. So they may not be finding you on the internet. So in that case, and if your property has been on sale for a long time, it may be advisable to advertise in the local paper in the property section. But I mean, again, we try to make that as painless as possible. And instead of making a profit on the newspaper advertising, which a lot of the estate agencies do, we see you as advertising our service. So we try and give a bit back for that. So that's why we offer the discounts, which again we think is a fair model.
What would your turnover be at the moment?
That I won't divulge at the moment.
No, I'm not asking you for the financial figure, but the number of people that would pass through your website at the moment.
We have 1,200 people on the site at the moment, and almost 30% of those are sold over the last 4 to 6 months.
That's good.
We've grown. I'm not kidding. This is true, Gerry. Now we started from a very low base because it was such a new concept to Irish people, but we grew 1,100% last year in terms of people listing on the site, and we grew 1,000% in terms of people coming to the site.
Now, what do you most reputable real estate agents will be in a position to direct you towards lease arrangements and freehold exchange and all that kind of stuff. They might possibly even have some arrangements with local mortgage houses or banks. Do you have that sort of operation going?
Well, because we're getting so big now, there's a lot of people, we do have a mortgage link and a lot more people looking to do that type of thing. We're going to very shortly be setting up other elements on the site, such as like fora, or a forum where people can actually discuss their issues. One of the most exciting things we have on the site, and we haven't actually yet launched it publicly because we haven't completed the development of it, it's going through a testing phase at the moment, but we gather information that's available public in terms of how much properties are being sold for. The system is called SD value, and it gives you an estimated value
of your property,
of the type of property, similar to yours in your area. And that's proving very, very popular at the moment, even though we haven't even completed the development of that.
That would also be quite a sensitive issue, because that would have to be vigilated and updated regularly.
Exactly.
Because you can't have your value 6 months out of date.
Exactly. No, they drop off our system every 6 months.
Okay.
And all that information will be provided to the person in terms of where the numbers are coming from and all the rest.
All right. Very interesting indeed, Fiona McLaughlin. You didn't have the Chicago Spire on your books, did you?
No. Gerry, actually, before I go, I'd like to offer that man that was on a free listing on our website.
That's a lovely idea.
And he can come back and tell you what his experience of it was or whatever. And I really hope that it would work.
Okay, we'll do that for him.
By trying it.
We'll get him to do that, and then he can come back and report to us as to how he got on or not, okay?
Excellent.
Fiona, thank you very much.
Morning,
the best
Gerry.
of luck.
Take
It sounds
care.
like a
Bye-bye.
fascinating project.
90 to 92. Gerry Ryan on 2FM.
Now, we stay in the property vein. Are you one of the 500,000 living in an apartment in Ireland today? Maybe you're thinking of buying one. If you're in either category, listen up. Apartment living has become a new lifestyle in Ireland, and a very desirable one, but not necessarily without its pitfalls, like everything in life. Question: what happens if your neighbour from across the hall starts running a brothel? Well, some fellas would say, I'll go. Others will say, oh dear, that's not good news. Or what if the neighbours are having wild all-night parties and you can't get a week of sleep, and every time you go over they either invite you in or threaten to beat you up? Maybe your neighbour's just living his life, but because the walls are so thin you can hear him sneeze. And how did that happen? Of course, when you viewed it, there was nobody living next door. Or maybe your whole apartment shakes when his washing machine cycle is on spin. We're joined in studio by Robert Gogan, who has worked for years as a managing agent and has managed over 30 apartments and developments, large, small, old and new. And he's written a book now called The Essential Guide to Apartment Living in Ireland. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
500,000, it's a big dimension to Irish property life now, isn't it?
Yes, and it's growing every year by quite a considerable amount, because as you drive around the country these days, you can see even in medium-sized and small towns that there are apartment developments going up where you never would have seen them maybe 10 years ago. They would have only been confined to the big cities and towns.
Any ideas on what the percentages would be, Robert, in terms of owner, occupied or leased?
No, there'd be no real statistic available on that. From my own experience, about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they would have most of them been owner-occupied. But I would think now the pendulum has swung completely, and I'd say most of them are now being bought as investments to let out to people, to let out to tenants.
And of course, with the interest rate hikes recently, we've seen not a huge disparity, but an increasingly worrying one between your mortgage and the rent that you're receiving from your tenant. That is not going to change substantially, I think, within the next year or so. Sure, it's not.
No, I don't think it is,
No, so you bought them for your children, just like your mother told you. Okay, let's look at the legal arrangement and the relationship that somebody has with the rest of the world when they buy an apartment. Because an apartment inevitably, by its physical nature, is not like a home, semi-detached or detached or otherwise. It's within a complex. It's within a framework or a building where there are shared facilities and where you may not actually even touch the ground upon which this general structure is based. So we all know with your semi-detached home or with your detached home, you are buying a freehold, And we know what that freehold is. It's a legal entitlement to the actual property and the ground upon which it is built. With an apartment, is it the same thing?
No, it's very much different. What you're buying when you buy an apartment is you are buying a lease. The legal structure is very much the same as if you were literally leasing an apartment for 6 months. You're like a tenant. You are a tenant in the apartment. The main difference is that your lease is for probably 500 to 1,000 years. You're paying no rent or a nominal rent of €1 a year or something, which people generally tend not to collect. So that is the main difference, that you have bought the exclusive right to possession of your apartment and to the enjoyment of it.
But it's quite different from the rights enjoyed generally by a freehold domestic detached or semi-detached owner, because usually he or she is not going to be subject to too many restrictions unless it's in Disney's Celebration or something like that. And increasingly, I suppose, in gated communities around the country, we'll see more and more restrictions imposed upon detached and semi-detached homes. But generally, you can do kind of whatever you want to do. You can put in wooden floors, painted purple, take out the middle floor of the whole home. Totally different when you bought an apartment.
Yes, because this right
for
that
good
you
reason
get,
in many cases.
Well, absolutely, because the close interdependence of people in an apartment complex is such that you have to have some rules or regulations, because otherwise things could just go mad, and all you want is one or two bad tenants or bad owners, and the place becomes unlivable in, basically. But also some of the other rules and regulations are to do with the legal structure, the payment of your service charges, and various other matters like this. But a lot of people don't realise that their ownership, shall we say, of their apartment is dependent on them keeping to the rules and paying their service charge. And they do run a realistic risk of the apartment being taken from them.
And because now that's something that I think most people purchasing an apartment will never consider. The possibility that it could be taken from them. They think that they might find themselves being brought up before the management committee. They might find the eventually established residence committee sending them solicitors' letters. They might become the target of egg throwing, but generally they're not going to have the property taken from them. In fact, that is a possibility.
Yes, I don't think it's happened in Ireland, and I think a court would be very, very reluctant to
set that precedent.
To set the precedent. But it is the main legal redress open to the management of an apartment complex, that if somebody isn't paying their service charges, or if they are acting outrageously and refusing to stop doing so, the redress is that the management company must take that person to court for forfeiture of the lease. In other words, take it back. Now, as I said,
and you don't get back your money.
Oh, no, you forfeit the lease, end of story. But I would imagine, and I know this has happened in one or two cases to date, that what happens if a case gets that far, or nearly does, the chances are there's a lending institution involved for most people who buy an apartment. The lending institution will be informed of the fact that a forfeiture of the lease is about to occur. And that is their only asset, because they probably know, well, if the lease becomes forfeit, they've no chance of getting the remainder of the mortgage that they lent out. So they have a right, and I know this to have happened in a lot of cases, and I've experienced it myself. They have a right to actually, particularly if there is the non-payment of a service charge over years, and this is one of the main things.
That's the main one, isn't it?
Yeah. They have a right to actually pay that service charge on behalf of the owner and put it onto the end of their mortgage some way. I don't know what their technical thing is, but they can do it because they have a right.
It would be an order of attachment. Yeah.
No, actually, I think it's just part of the agreement that the lender and the purchaser has made with the actual lending institution, that the lending institution have a right. They have an inherent right under common law to protect their asset anyway. Salvage is the right of salvage of a mortgage, I think, and it goes back an awful long way, back into the 1800s.
And in your experience, normally what they will do, rather than allow this lease drift off into the hands of the management company is to step in, start paying it, and then inform you that at the end of your mortgage, it's not the end of your mortgage because you've got another 40 or 50,000 that you've got to pay.
So no matter how big a gripe you have, and this is the reasons why so many people don't pay their service charges, apart from just these people
they think
in
it's
Ireland.
their biggest protest, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so silly, and I say it in the book, and I itemise out so clearly how stupid that is, but they think this is the only bit of armour they have, but in fact there's so many other ways of dealing with the gripes they may have in an apartment complex. The lending institution will pay the bill, and it becomes a huge frustration for some owners when they feel that they are making their protest by not paying the service charge, and suddenly the building society pays it for them and it's lobbed onto the end of their mortgage.
Now, in terms of what could be considered, negative behaviour or behaviour warranting, looking at your arrangement with the management company or looking at your lease or forfeiture or anything like that. That's the big one, not paying the management, because that's and there's substantial sums of money. There's very few places now where they're looking for €300 a year or something like that.
I'd be very suspicious of any apartment block where there was service charge of $300 a year.
It's thousands nowadays.
It is.
But it's also, let's go back to the difference between the freehold semi-D or the freehold detached home, where unless An Taisce or the planners have an interest, more than likely you're going to be able to put in whatever windows you want. You could change the roof if you like, put in chimney stacks or take down. There's a whole host of things that you could do. You're not going to be able to do that with your apartment.
No. One specific point that comes up quite regularly these days is the issue of wooden floors.
This is a big one.
I know. And I know from almost all the apartments I've ever been in my life, either professionally or socially, they have wooden floors.
Yeah.
But most leases, particularly the older ones, maybe for apartment complexes going back 10 years and earlier, most of them that I've seen have a very strict stipulation that you are not permitted under any circumstances to fit a wooden floor in your apartment. And you have signed your lease, so you have signed a contract saying, I will not do this. Now, I understand with some more modern apartment blocks these days, they do stipulate that you can put a wooden floor in, but they stipulate the noise deadening materials, that they itemise in detail exactly the type of floor that you must put in. But taking the older blocks, they say you can't, and if you have a wooden floor in, or if you decide to put a wooden floor in, or if you look at the block or look at the apartment before you buy it and envisage in your mind that there's carpet down, but when I put my wooden floors it'll be gorgeous, etc., etc. Most people have no idea that in fact it's against the regulations to do it, and in probably 9 out of 10 times nothing ever occurs out of it. But if the neighbour next door makes an official complaint to the management from the noise coming from your apartment because of moving furniture around or moving your chairs around now and again to change the position of the television, or just purely walking on the floor, if they complain there's noise, the management company has no choice but legally to enforce you to cover the wooden floor with the carpet, if that's what's stipulated in the lease, or to do whatever is stipulated in the lease. And you could lose your entire wooden floor, and there's absolutely nothing you can do legally about it.
Now, of course, if you go back in time, a lot of the earlier developments, they didn't have soundproofing, and not as much money would have been spent on the development. Now, of course, there are opportunities to create technology in flooring where that soundproofing can be put in place, and there are some developments where there are wooden floors as a result of you complying with regulations between yourself and the contractor when you're purchasing. But that's only very recently, I think.
It is, and also there's a situation that if there is the stipulation that I mentioned earlier in the lease that you cannot put a wooden floor down under any circumstances, even today, if there's a wondrous new material you can put under wooden floors that make them absolutely, totally silent, and you go to the management,
still in breach.
You can't put them in. It's etched in stone, and that lease cannot be changed.
But if the contractor has conspired with you at the time of construction to do that,
but that's fine. Whatever is in the lease, and people don't realise, and unfortunately most people don't have a copy of their own lease. They don't get the copy of the lease when they close.
Now let's just look at that issue after the break. As a matter of fact, if you have questions, we've one question here which I don't fully understand. I might have to have this explained. Can you ask what protection I have against our management agent running off with all the money that we've paid? Was that not what they do anyway? I mean, They do have to spend it, of course, on things that they've agreed to do. You can't just take it off to Ibiza. Now, that question, what protection have I against our management agent running off with all the money that we've paid them?
Well, that would depend on one particular arrangement, and that is whether or not the managing agent is the sole signatory on the bank account. And I think the experience in general is that most managing agents would hold the bank accounts and the checkbooks because they've got to be writing checks virtually every day to various people for things. And I know in my experience years ago, we took on one block where the board of directors of the management company insisted that they be a signatory as well, and it became impossible to run it. We were chasing directors around the country to get checks signed, and they were on holidays and they were in hospital and they were all over the place. It's
or
impossible.
Disagreeing with your spend.
Well, that's we could go into that for a while, but not even so much the spend. They may disagree with how much it cost to do a particular item, and we'd know that was the right cost of doing the item, but they'd disagree and there'd be war over it, and it just didn't work. So on the premise that your average managing agent is in a position to write all the checks on behalf of the management company, there actually legally is nothing to stop the managing agent writing a cheque to the managing agent and taking the next boat, herself, and taking the next boat to China. Now, there is a thing called financial bonding that a lot of, what are they called, investment intermediaries and people have to have. I am well aware that there are a lot of managing agents out there who don't have financial bonding whatsoever. And I would advise anybody who owns an apartment to start making inquiries immediately with their management company or the managing agent in relation to financial bonding, because they could waken up tomorrow morning and discover that their entire block is broke.
Now, when you say broke, what do you mean by that?
Well, nothing in the account. Whatever sinking funds that may have built up over the years, and you could have 100 or 200,000 in there or more, depending on the size of the development, the whole lot gone. Literally, you could have a situation where you receive a circular from your management company, the board of directors of the management company, saying, we have no money, we can't pay for cleaners, we can't pay for waste removal, we can't pay the insurance bill coming up, so we now have to levy everyone a couple of €1,000 just to get back up and running because Mr. Managing agent.
Who would step in at that stage if the managing company went either bust or legged it? Who would step in if there was no bonding? Nobody really, except the residents themselves.
The owners would have to step in and pay the money. But even if there is bonding, and this is another very important point.
First of all, bonding isn't obligatory. There's no legal
But there are no regulations whatsoever in relation to...
There's also no legal requirement, even if you do feel like having bonding, to have it up to the level of the actual fund.
No. There's no legal obligation on a managing agent to either have professional indemnity insurance, which also is very important if they make some mistakes that cost a lot of money, or have bonding. There are no regulations whatsoever in this particular sphere. And I think it's one of the...
And no managing body either.
Well, the managing body... Oh, a managing body overall in the country.
No.
There isn't actually. No, there is a managing body in each block, of course. Yeah. But no, there's no authority.
There's no ASTI. There's nobody there.
There's absolutely nobody there. Anybody tomorrow morning could hire a little place, or even not hire a place, but could set themselves up and put an ad in that they are a managing agent, and they
don't have to sit exams, they don't have to join anybody, they don't have to wear a special tie on the first Friday of each month. Not at all. Is there any plans for that?
The government is definitely examining this in great detail at the moment, and I'm aware of it. It's a good bit away yet, I think.
Now, we're going to go into the news now in just a few moments. We'll be back after 11. I know that you've all got a lot of questions. We make it sound very bleak. We make it sound like, there's managing companies teetering on the edge of extinction or criminality. In general?
Well, it's very difficult to generalise at the moment. There would be a lot of apartment blocks out there in very big trouble. Very, very big trouble. And the main problem with this, which we haven't actually addressed yet, and it's another vital issue, is you take a block 30, 40 years old at this stage, it's going to start needing a lot of work. And
remedial work.
Huge money is involved in this. And a lot of them have built up virtually no sinking fund whatsoever over that period of 30 years. And you're looking at a situation now whereby the owners are going to have to cough up a lot of money over the next... This is going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.
Because this wasn't anticipated, and there's nothing in the agreement between the management company and the owners to say, well, of course, this isn't the pyramids, and in a relatively short period of time, remedial action will be needed, and we will make provision for that. That's not there, generally.
No, the vital thing is actually... Gerry, it's one of the most important parts of every single obligation in every lease of the management company. They must set up and maintain an adequate sinking fund. It's one of the most important obligations of the board of directors of any management company. But to maintain an adequate sinking fund, it's going to reflect very much on the service charges.
This isn't a very big book, but it's a very good book. And it's an essential book. And that's why it's called The Essential Guide to Apartment Living in Ireland. Robert Grogan, thank you very much indeed. There's plenty more in there, by the way. Good morning and welcome.
If I could just say, it's also available on our website, apartmentlivingineIreland, all one word, .com.
ApartmentlivingineIreland, all one word.
Thank you, Gerry.
How much is it, by the way, just out of curiosity?
€15.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Good morning.
Thank you.